Welcome everybody to our third fall semester webinar. My name is Tony Castenario. I'm the Director of Recruitment for all the MBA programs here at Willamette University. And this is going to be our final recorded session for the year. We're going to make sure for all of those out in the ether, we're going to make sure you guys get this recording. And for everybody that's here, we appreciate you taking the time. We've got a great one tonight. So we're going to kind of get kicked off by introducing our admissions team first. And then we're going to get into the fun part of all this stuff. So again, my name is Tony Castenario, Director of Recruitment at Willamette University MBA. My associates are Nate Nagy, Alex Salazar, and Marley Nicasio. You've probably heard from myself through email, or you've heard through our assistant directors. And you're going to be receiving more information about the program, more information about how to apply. You can ask us questions at the end. You can also email us and text us and call us and all that good stuff. But for this evening, we're going to get this thing rolling. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to allow Professor Kieran O'Connor here. Actually, I apologize, Kieran. Let me share my screen one more time because I got to get to my slide. So tonight's guest speaker is Professor Kieran O'Connor, and I know you guys can't see it yet, but tell me, can you see his slide now? Perfect. So Professor Kieran O'Connor is Associate Professor of Management. He's going to be speaking about managing with authenticity. Professor Kieran O'Connor is going to be able to take questions at the end. If you have questions that you want to submit in the chat, we'll be monitoring the chat, and then we'll give you a chance to go ahead and share those thoughts at the end. And now, Professor O'Connor, I apologize on that. You can go ahead and share your screen.
Super. Thanks, Kaz. All right, let's see. Does that show up for everybody? All right. Well, it's great. It's great to see everybody. It's great to be part of this panel. What's particularly cool is not only to see some colleagues up here, but to see some former students and alumni up here. So I got Tovar and Gianna and Christopher. It's a pleasure to get to share the stage with you in the panel. I'm happy to answer any questions about this research topic that has fascinated me for several years now. Feel free to post questions, or feel free to save them until the end. It's up to you, but it's just fun to get to share some of the ideas that I've been thinking about for a while, and be with this group. It's just fun to kind of share all of our ideas together and our experiences as part of the Willamette community here at Atkinson. So as a little bit of an introduction, I'm a researcher in organizational behavior. I tend to have a focus that's I think of my research and teaching lens as one of cognitive and social psychology, which have been disciplines that have informed not just management and organizational behavior, but also specific topics like behavioral economics and other social sciences that impact things like managerial decision-making and managing organizations. So for a long time, I've been interested in this topic of authenticity, and I'll tell you a little bit about kind of how I think about that. And these are some topics that I would incorporate, for example, into my core classes on organizational behavior, managing individuals, teams, and organizations, and also electives like leadership and managing decision-making and negotiations. So when I think about authenticity, it seems to be everywhere. So I first got interested in this topic as a graduate student, and when you almost can't walk down the street without somebody kind of blasting you with a message that they're an authentic restaurant, or they're an authentic organization, or come work for us and you can be the real you. And this kind of pervades our everyday lives. It seems to be everywhere, and it seems to be everywhere maybe more than it has been in the past. In fact, my co-authors and I recently did a big research paper on this, where we looked at 450 in the last 10 years, 450 research papers across multiple disciplines. And we looked at what researchers were calling authenticity. And as a starting point, we said, well, let's, before we get to the research scholarship on this, we said, maybe let's look at what is happening in real life, like over the last 100 years. So Google has this cool tool, the Ngram search. And what this is a proportion of words in the entire corpus of text that Google has incorporated. And we can look for the words authentic and authenticity and all of the root stem words related to that to see how frequently they show up in the history of the last 100 years relative to other words. So how often do we see authenticity given the total number of words in this topic? And what we find is, particularly in the last 50 years or so, this substantial increase that people are using this word in books and in writing and in everyday vernacular more than they historically have relative to other language that's out there. And this has led other scholars and myself to think, well, this is a pretty big deal, and this is something to pay attention to. So Potter is a scholar that's kind of in this field, has talked about authenticity, that the demand for authenticity in everyday life is one of the most powerful and important movements. So this is, I think about this like, what does that mean? Like, you can imagine, where does this exist? And authenticity shows up in the top left corner in artwork. Like, is art authentic versions of itself? Like, for example, is art authentic, or is it a forgery? And that's particularly relevant in today's context. Among musicians, we often think about the musicians we listen to being authentic versions of themselves, and are the lyrics speaking something that's true to them. In the lower left, we think about authenticity at work. Do I feel like when I come to work, can I be the real me? And do I feel like the people around me are espousing their values in a genuine way? And local to the Pacific Northwest, I think about companies like Columbia and others. Do we think of those as authentic companies? All of those feel like important questions to ask, but what's really interested me in the last several years is whether we're asking the same kind of question when we switch to all those different contexts, from art to music to our everyday life at work, wherever that might be, to the organizations that we interact with. And just a couple of days ago, I saw somebody sent me this message, and it popped up, and I realized authentic is the word of the year, according to Merriam-Webster. There's others, if you kind of you can look at the website and see what they've deemed authentic, but it's clearly something that's on the rise and people are paying attention to. I think it's true because we value relationships, and we want to be seen as being true to who we are and what we care about. We also want to work with people who we think are being genuine, and we want to be a part of something that feels maybe a little bit bigger than ourselves, and that we feel like we can find meaning in. When we thought about this and we kind of started to look at different disciplines, so for example, how do sociologists, how do organizational behavior scholars, how do psychologists, how do philosophers, how do artists think about authenticity, that was like a starting point. And that was like, well, wait a second, are we all talking about the same thing as we all use this word with more frequency? And some of the background words on this slide you can see are kind of synonymous with authenticity. So something that is real, something that is genuine, something that is valid, something that is true, something that is credible. And that was kind of a starting point. So for us, our first most important question was trying to understand, in order to understand what authenticity is, we first had to understand what that kind of meaning was and what the interpretation was. And it's a helpful category or classification, we think, is in order to understand authenticity, you have to understand it as a kind of referential process. So when you assess somebody as like, am I an authentic person, or is my manager being authentic, or the organizations that I interact with, are they authentic? There's often some kind of reference point. And to kind of walk you through a casual example of this, I think about music. So I love music. I have to, as a disclaimer here, I have to say I'm not an expert in country music. So if anybody on the call can chime in and correct me if any of my details are off. But this is a photograph of a well-known country musician, one of the early quote unquote outlaw country musicians, along with Willie Nelson and others. This is Waylon Jennings. And you could think about asking a question, like a simple question, like, what is authenticity? We could say, well, let's apply that to somebody like Waylon Jennings as a musician. And this is where we started to come up with 3 distinct meanings of authenticity in our research that are being used in nearly 500 papers, research scholarly papers in the literature over the last 10 years. And we published a paper on this in a well-known journal called the Academy of Management Annals. And we proposed that there's kind of 3 main ways that scholars, at least, are understanding authenticity. And those are what we call authenticity as consistency, conformity, and connection. And each of those answers a question that's referential. So if Waylon Jennings is authentic as consistency, what this means in our kind of research study is that he has an alignment between his internal values, so how he feels as a person, what he values, what he cares about, what he sings about, and his external expressions of those values. So when he sings songs, when musicians that might come to mind for you, when they're on stage and they're performing, are they singing something that you believe to be a genuine expression of how they feel inside? So we often, in our kind of everyday lives as people, we have kind of our private attitudes and our thoughts, what we really think, kind of who we are, our true self. And then we have the way that we act, and we tend to be healthier and happier, and we have better workplace satisfaction if we feel like we can express an alignment between how we feel inside and how we feel outside. So we are being true to who we are. So the reference there is kind of who we are inside and how we behave publicly with others. We could ask kind of a related but a different version of authenticity if we think about Waylon Jennings as what we called authenticity as conformity. So is he authentic as a country musician? Well, that's a little bit of a different question, because that involves an understanding of how the category of country music is defined. So that's a socially constructed category. It's often something that has a lot of input, like experts in music, fans who are loyal country music enthusiasts, maybe even fans of Waylon Jennings himself and others. And in order to be an authentic country musician, it requires a different set of ingredients. So, for example, you might need specific instruments. You might need a slide guitar, or you might need a style of a specific guitar. You might be plugged into an electric guitar. You might only have the ability to play acoustic guitar. He also kind of has the dress and the code associated with country music. He's got a cowboy hat on. He's got specific styling on his music. And you might even think about specific chord progressions and topics that you can sing about that stem from the blues and the way that music evolved in the southern part of the US in the late 19th century and early 20th century. Now, all that is distinct from a third category of authenticity, is what we call connection. And this is if somebody has kind of a legitimate claim on coming from a place or a time or an era or an object being associated with a person. So in this case, we could ask, well, if Waylon Jennings is authentic as a country musician, does he come from the place where you'd think country musicians come from? And the answer is yes. He was raised in rural West Texas, and he has kind of a typical background. Funny trivia I've learned in kind of researching him, he actually played in Buddy Holly's band and he dropped out of high school and he pursued music. So he had kind of this rebel persona that fits as part of it. So he comes from that place. So kind of reviewing these 3 meanings, the first one, consistency, is a definition that people use for authenticity, which tends to mean, are you being true to yourself and your values? The second one, conformity, is do you express the values that are defined by a specific category? So that could be a genre like country music. For chefs or restaurants, which I'll get to in a second, that could mean, are you true to a specific type of cuisine, like a specific national cuisine or even a regional cuisine within a country? And the third is whether you have the kind of expected associations that you would need in order to be considered authentic. So a connection with a person, a time, or a place. In this case, Waylon Jennings has a legitimate connection to kind of a time and a place. You could also think about this as another example, like if we zoom into this photograph, he's holding a guitar. And that specific guitar you would expect in an auction to be almost invaluable given how famous he has become. And if you compared that guitar next to an identical manufacturing from the same producer, but one that he didn't play or didn't ever own, even if a consumer might not be able to tell those two objects apart, the one that he held would fetch more value because that would be an authentic Waylon Jennings guitar. So all of these things have led us to understand that there's, like, the first question that we kind of answered in this research process was, what is authenticity if people are using it more often in the last, say, 50 years or even in the last decade? And the answer is, well, if they're using it a lot more often, then typically what we're hearing in everyday life is that they're using it in at least one of these three ways. And it's important to clarify that, because if researchers are studying this, one research team might be studying it according to kind of that individual variable of being true to yourself, which is pretty old. It's probably the oldest, like, documented version of authenticity, is being true to yourself in the sense of ancient Greek. Socrates once said, to thine own self, or sorry, that's Shakespeare. Socrates said, an unexamined life is not worth living. In Shakespeare and Hamlet, Laertes says to Polonius, to thine own self be true. So to be true to yourself is to be authentic. And that's the most commonly used term. But sociologists are talking about it in terms of categories and membership, like country music or restaurant types of cuisine. And often marketing is using it in terms of connection, like with objects associated with places, times, and specific people. So the first step is kind of understanding, well, what do we mean when we think about authenticity? The second step is asking, well, why does that matter? And it turns out that in all of these contexts, there's almost this universal appeal that if something is considered authentic, then it is seen as more valuable. So that's kind of like this universally good thing. If I'm being authentic, or if an object is an authentic guitar, or if his music is authentic, then it's better than a comparable but not authentic version. And that led us to a second question, which is, well, if all these things are good, like to be authentic is to be more valuable, or to generate more value, and that could be in the sense of, for example, job satisfaction. Like, I'm happier at work, which is going to increase my performance. It probably means that I'm less likely to look for a different job, which means I'm going to stay at the organization longer, which means that I'm happier there and I'm going to provide more value and see more meaning in what I do. Then all of those things are good, but are there other kinds of value? And so we started asking questions about that. So in other words, like on one side of the equation, we'd say, what kinds of authenticity are we talking about? And how do we manage that authenticity in organizations? And on the other side, we'd say, well, if it's good, is it good in different ways depending on what kind of meaning we're talking about? And we zoomed into two different kinds of value that authenticity might generate for organizations. And those are specifically, we looked in the context of restaurants, and we thought about, well, how much are customers willing to pay for an experience of eating out at a restaurant? And so that's one dimension. Well, if they're willing to pay more, then that's going to generate more value for that organization. So if you're a small business owner, if you've started a restaurant, or if it's a larger organization, that's going to be a key dimension to think about. What's the revenue generated from an interaction with your customers? The second kind of value, though, would be a kind of social appeal to it. So how much are people talking about your restaurant? How much are people recommending it to friends and loved ones? And what kind of star ratings do you get online? If that's going to drive traffic to your organization, then that's going to be an important indication of how much value you're generating from being seen as authentic. But these two things would be potentially distinct. They might overlap. So you might have restaurants where they charge more and they have high stars, but you also might have restaurants with thousands of reviews that are really highly rated, but that aren't charging very much because they're focusing more on volume of traffic into the organization as opposed to the revenue per customer that are coming into the organization. So this is a question that we asked, and I'll give you just a brief overview of one field study we did in a research paper, and then I'll wrap up with that finding. So the context of this study we wanted to ask with real restaurants was a context in a small town that was doing a restaurant week event. So typically in various urban settings around the country. There's restaurant weeks that tend to happen around January when typical restaurant business is a little bit slower, and sometime during the summer when that's generating. And the idea is that you can generate kind of a collective experience where people get to go to a restaurant and have, say, a set prefix meal where there's 3 courses, and maybe you get to go to a restaurant that's a little bit more upscale that you wouldn't typically have the chance to go to, or maybe it gives you a chance to kind of try different restaurants, but the restaurants coordinate this activity so it happens in a specific week. And what we did is we partnered with the restaurant organizations in this specific city, and we gave them gift cards that they would hand out to customers who actually just finished dining during their restaurant week. And we asked them a series of questions that were mapped onto those 3 different versions of authenticity we just talked about. And we said, we want you to evaluate the experience that you just had in this restaurant according to how authentic it was. And there were sets of questions that related to each of those kinds of authenticity, and particularly focus on the first 2. So whether the organization was seen as authentic in terms of being true to its values, like was a chef focused on its values and what it really cared about and its kind of true identity, or was the restaurant focused more on the category that it belonged to? So was it an authentic barbecue restaurant? Was this authentic French cuisine? Was this authentic Northern Italian Piedmont cuisine? Were these authentic Oaxacan moles? Those kinds of things. And we asked them, it's true that you could answer any of those questions in any way you wanted. So restaurants could score high on both of those kinds of authenticity, or they could score high on one and low on the other. And then we asked them questions about how much they would be willing to pay for a similar experience at that restaurant, and how much they would recommend it to a friend and give a star rating to that restaurant. And so what we found, we looked at the relationship between these sets of variables, and we found is authenticity is consistency. So the idea that the more individuals saw the restaurant experience as being true to a sense of who it was, like a true sense of value that could be related to the chef or to the overarching kind of values of a farm to table kind of restaurant, we found that customers were significantly willing to pay more for that. And I should also say, we had a lot of different control variables in here, including things like how often the diners reported eating out, what the typical price was for when they ate out, how much did they typically spend, about how many times per week, how many people were in their party, and other kinds of background information like that. We want to hold constant in our statistical analyses. And holding all that constant, we found that the extent to which they saw the restaurant as more authentic in terms of being true to itself, true to its values, customers were willing to pay more for that. But kind of surprising to us and interesting is that that kind of authenticity about being true to its values didn't increase the kind of social ratings of star systems. So they didn't necessarily give it a premium in how many stars they received, but they were willing to pay more for a similar meal if they were to go back to that place again. Now, the flip of this is we looked at conformity. What we called authenticity is conformity, whether it belongs to a specific category. And there we find that this dimension, this interpretation or definition of authenticity, of being true to, say, a specific kind of cuisine, significantly increased the actual diner's willingness to give it a higher star review on websites like Yelp or Google Reviews or previously Zagat, et cetera. But this kind of authenticity as conformity did not increase customers' willingness to pay more for that same meal. And so when we think about this, this was kind of what we thought was a pretty neat finding, and we ended up publishing a research paper on this in a journal with a couple of other follow-up studies where we looked at this finding with music, again with dining experiences in an experiment, and then one other context. And if anybody's interested, feel free to reach out. I have my email at the end of the presentation, and I can send that research paper to you. But we find this kind of interesting relationship, which is intriguing. So on the one hand, where I started is, if authenticity is important and it's being used more than it ever has been in kind of recorded history of text, well, there's different meanings. And that's one meaning can be kind of being true to your true self of like who you are. And the other is being true to kind of a socially defined category and conforming to the rules and appropriateness of what is true for that kind of grouping or genre. And that each of these, if there's different meanings, each of these seems to be kind of uniquely associated with specific kinds of value. So here in an organizational context, specifically with dining experiences, authenticity where you're true to yourself, true to your values at the individual level of the chef, or even at the organization level of kind of its value proposition or mission, increases your willingness to pay more for that experience to the extent that you're seen as more authentic. And if you're true to the category, it tends to increase the social experience, word of mouth, star rating, and sharing with others. Now, this is interesting in terms of the implications, because if you think about as you're managing, you often will pass by, every time I see one of these, I want to take a picture for my research to see like a restaurant that says authentic restaurant of whatever kind of cuisine. It's important to then like first say, well, what kind of authenticity are you talking about? Because if you're claiming authenticity based on a set of values like sustainability, farm to table, animal husbandry, sourcing of ingredients from local context, a chef's maybe specific conception of a valued kind of domain, then that might be able to maybe increase the per customer price that you're able to ask of your consumers, but might not necessarily mean you're going to get more attention for more individuals talking about it or getting into your restaurant. On the other hand, if you are in a kind of an exemplar of a category, if you are like you're the best version of a specific kind of cuisine and you're the most authentic, then people might talk about you more and you might get more customers to come, but it might not necessarily mean that you can say raise the prices on your menu, as people see that as an appropriate response to that level of authenticity. So that's kind of the end of the presentation that I have planned for you today. I'm happy to answer any questions now or maybe save to later, whatever the audience prefers. And I'm going to put my email up here in case you have questions. Feel free to reach out anytime, but maybe some questions to kind of think about as you go off into your lives for the rest of the week and weekend. Think about where in your holiday shopping you see claims of authenticity. Now you can say, well, what kind of authenticity? And maybe ask, well, why would that matter for managers and for organizations? So thanks for letting me share some of my research with you. And with that, maybe I'll end my slideshow, and I hope to hear from some of you soon.
Awesome. That was great, Professor. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again, and I'm going to keep, I'll keep your email up here. Can everybody see Professor Kieran O'Connor's on my screen now? Yeah. So that was great because, yeah, I mean, that really makes me want to ask questions. Is it better to have that higher price, or is it better to drive more customers in the door? And how do you keep that kind of stuff going? So intriguing stuff. But Marley, if you see any questions, come up in the chat. If there's anybody who's here that would like to ask Professor O'Connor a question, now's a great time. But we will also come back. So if you don't have a question quite yet, that's okay too. So, but I do want to, and you guys stop me if there is a question, but well, it looks like we have, let's see, real quick. The real question, how do you do both?
Yeah,
Right.
it was me. The real question is, how do you do both? How do you drive authenticity with a high price and get more people in the door?
Spoken like a true salesman right there, Tovar.
Man, Tovar always asks great questions. So like, you know, he was in class last year and now he's right back in and asking these great questions. We've wondered that, and it's what's cool is this is kind of the research process. So that was a finding that we wondered, could you do both, and would it be worth it to do both? And in this particular research setting, we were surprised to see that the relationship seemed to be uniquely tied to each of those. So if you were authentic according to that kind of consistency definition, it didn't necessarily lead to more star ratings, and we kind of expected it, honestly, to drive both, or at least for maybe there to be maybe both kinds of value are important to both distinctions of authenticity, but maybe in different orders. We were surprised to see that it wasn't significant, so it didn't have an impact on one, but it did have an impact on the other. But I think future research remains to be seen. So in that sales experience, Tovar, if you've got some key insights, then we should talk about collaborating.
Awesome. Great. Any other, Chris, you raised your hand?
Yeah, I love this this discussion regarding authenticity, and I'm speaking to you tonight from the Runaway and Homeless Youth national conference here in Seattle, and HUD uses authentic youth collaboration as one of the benchmarks for scoring applications for new projects. And this determines hundreds of millions of dollars worth of funding being dispersed to nonprofits across our nation. And while they give examples of authentic youth collaboration, they do not actually define what authentic youth collaboration or authenticity is in that context. I've been trying to, in my mind, categorize it into one of your categories, and of course, without any research behind it, just anecdotally, it seems to fit in different spaces at different times based on who's using it, right? Whether it's the youth speaking about authentic collaboration with themselves, whether it's the boards of directors talking about this as something they want to promote in the organization, or whether it's HUD using this as a benchmark to score those organizations and their proposals. I don't have a specific question for you on this, aside from, do you have any insight to how authenticity could interact with this world, and defining those modes of authenticity could benefit this space?
Yeah, Christopher, thank you so much. I mean, it's just such an important question, and one where, I think the research is often a slower process than where the reality on the ground is moving. So our study was almost like what we call a meta-analysis, where we did a study of other research studies, because we wanted to know if this is happening out in the real world and people are using this words with so much frequency, then how are scholars in different disciplines thinking about it? And the somewhat discouraging answer on the front end is that we found that there was some kind of fragmentation or narrowness in how people were defining it. So if you were in a specific discipline, for example, if you were a sociologist, we found that the prevailing meaning people used to talk about authenticity was in this context of categories. That's a big kind of like a lens that sociologists use for a lot of their research, is like thinking about this in terms of categories and belongingness within specific boundaries that are socially constructed. Whereas if you were a psychologist, so like from child development to kind of personality psychologist, to even like cognitive and social psychologist, you were talking about this, about the idea of like identity and the self and being true to who you are as kind of a metaphor. And we found that those two kind of those branches, those disciplines weren't really talking to each other. So one thing I think that's cool in your question is that you see how these different, at least, and these are just 3 meetings that we kind of broadly categorize what's been done out there, but certainly there could be other interpretations that could fit. And it's neat to hear you say that you could see these applying at different parts of a process or different parts of kind of a system that's tackling such an important issue. So I'd say, one thing that's kind of maybe worth thinking about is, to my knowledge, I don't know of any kind of similar systematic study, but something that kind of links to what we do at Atkinson is look at different kinds of organizational contexts, but how we can apply our knowledge to each of those. So we look at for-profit organizations, of course, but also not-for-profit organizations and government, and see, does a topic like authenticity apply equally and similarly across all 3 of those, or are there nuances that we really need to pay attention to? And I think the answer is there's probably some really important nuances, even if there are similarities. So that would be kind of like even one level above the disciplinary distinctions that we found in our research is, what about like broad sectors and classes of organizations from for-profit, not-for-profit? And so our studies in particular were tended to be in the for-profit context, but there's others in our meta-analysis that would have involved, for example, with authenticity as consistency, there were a lot of really interesting findings in in identity and research on the self and psychology research on relationships and being true to yourself and like the quality of partnerships and group settings. So I think it's a great question, and like my answer to Tovar is that maybe the research just still remains to be seen on it. But one thing that I think is maybe a helpful distinction is I feel like half of my research's identity is on authenticity. The other half is actually on when individuals and organizations have authenticity failures. So when people are seen as inauthentic, and that's true for organizations too. And one step even maybe more negative than that is when the label of hypocrisy comes about. And so I think about authenticity in that first kind of bucket of being true to yourself. Really what it is it's like a match between what you say your values are and then how you act in alignment with those values. So do you walk the talk? Do you say what you do? Do you kind of live up promises? That's particularly true for organizations. So if you're an organization that claims about a particular set of values, for example, supporting a group of individuals or a mission, but then you're seen as not living up to it, or even worse, maybe doing something that's in contrast to that. Audiences and individuals are particularly sensitive to those kinds of values-based violations. And I think that gives us some deeper insight into why authenticity is so important, is that it's really rooted in something that gives us meaning as people. It's like all about values give us significance and meaning. And so when people espouse values and then enact those in their behavior at the individual level or at the organizational level, that's seen as particularly important because that's giving something that's a very human part of the equation. But if people make a claim that they're doing something for a values-based reason and then fall short of it, or even worse, contradict it, that's a particularly kind of red flag lightning rod that audiences say, hang on. Then that kind of ventures into an important outcome of like a trust violation and lots of different kinds of negative outcomes associated with that. So yeah, great question. I think there's a lot to be done on that, but maybe there's some kinds of conversation pieces that we could continue with. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Professor O'Connor. This is a really insightful, great talk. Really appreciate you being here. So, and we can get to more questions here at the end. I'm going to kind of segue that hot topic, which was great. We love doing these. We love inviting our professors, but we also love inviting our students and our alum. And we've done one of these kind of return on investment kind of outcomes talks before, where we brought some people on, and we brought several MBA for professional students, and we have not brought on any early career change students. So we've got both here tonight. We have a current MBA for professional, but we also have two recently graduated early career change students that are here to speak with everybody, because a lot of questions that we get are, were they able to get internships? How does the program set them up for success? Were they able to land a job right after graduating? And so we really wanted to convey that message, as well as bring a current MBA for professional student. How are you leveraging your MBA? What made you decide to come get your MBA? All those are great questions. And so all three of our panelists that are going to be speaking next are going to hit on those topics. And if you have questions, again, you can ask them in the chat and we can go at the end. But Gianna Marchese and Tovar Marchese. Yeah, I know. Tovar Moreno are both graduates of our early career change MBA program, and they're going to be speaking first. And then Christopher Lopez is a current student in our MBA for Professionals program who will be speaking next. So hopefully everybody can still see my screen, and I will go on to Gianna's, and I'm just teasing Gianna. So you're just like,
it's just how it is. Am I just talking about myself?
You are. You're going to go ahead and kind of tell us why you chose Willamette, how you leveraged your MBA, how it helped you get to the position that you're in now and what you're doing now.
Okay. So I chose Willamette back in the day when I was looking to play softball in college. And I remember hearing about the MBA program in the undergrad admission office. Because I was interested in obtaining some sort of graduate degree. I wasn't sure in what, but I had my eyes set on the 3-2 program, the early career program, from day one walking into Willamette. So I started going to all the donut days early, and that's when I met Nate and Cass and just developed a relationship there. So I got to play softball for all 5 years of college because of COVID, which was nice. And I think that was really nice to leverage, having an extra year and being able to play and still go to school. So kind of the best of both worlds there, I guess. And then after graduating, I knew I was interested in something under the realm of like entertainment, marketing of some kind, TV, film. And I had a couple internships in that category. One with MGM and a couple different agencies. And I landed at an agency, a creative marketing agency, right after I graduated, and then have already pivoted to a different job. And now I work at Warner Brothers. And I think leveraging an MBA was really helpful in that change. I got to negotiate my salary, and I think it kind of set me apart from the pile, I like to think. And so it's been lovely, and I owe it a lot to Willamette and the network that I've made there. So yeah.
No, that's great. And so talk to us a little bit, Gianna. So you were able to kind of get that internship while you were in the program.
Yeah.
And then as soon as you were done and you graduated, a lot of questions that we often get are, well, what does that process look like? Are you applying to jobs while you're finishing school? Did you get a job? Because there's a lot of angst people have right now. And if I get my MBA, am I guaranteed a job? And you put a lot of work into this, and you landed at a great company right now, and you're doing what you love to do. So kind of talk a little bit about that process, that internship process, and then landing on your feet.
So what I started doing when I was first looking for internships, I kind of hate to say I really wanted to move to Los Angeles, as most of the people in this Zoom know. And so I would LinkedIn filter to alumni networks that are from the MBA or just Willamette in general on LinkedIn that were living here. And I found some that were working at Universal and different companies that I was interested in. And so I just kind of used the network through Willamette, even though I didn't really know these people. That was the beauty of LinkedIn. And just started a bunch of conversations, and kind of did that with the family I have here as well. Ended up meeting somebody who had worked at MGM, and got to speak with him about his experience, kind of did informationals, and then applied, interviewed, and got my internship. And I think from there, that's where I developed the network to kind of for later jobs. So I had met somebody at MGM, this was summer 2021, who kind of helped me find a different internship the following summer to gain different experience at an agency. And so it's kind of funny how it's like one big domino effect, because then from there I met somebody who works at Warner Brothers. And so it's just all about having those conversations, I think. It's definitely not easy. You develop such an amazing network, and a lot of people can verbally tell you like, you're a shoo-in, you're this, you're that, you're a degree. Like I think I had a period of time where I was putting a lot of my eggs in one basket and just thinking like, because I have an amazing degree and because I have an amazing network, that I'm set, and learn from my mistakes. That is not always the case. Keep networking, keep making those connections, and just putting yourself out there, because I think once people know you and know your personality and know what you can do, and then they find out you have this amazing degree, like, that's just two dubs in my opinion. So so I don't know, it all helped itself, but my industry was also going through a lot. We had a lot of strikes and a lot of things happening that had some hiring freezes and stuff. So, but the pivots have been great. I've met a lot of people. My past agency, I met some amazing people that I'm still really close with and have been networking with. I will have them in my network forever. So that's kind of my journey, I guess.
No, that's great. I mean, I truly believe that this program does help teach people how to pivot, because there are going to be ups and downs. There's ups and downs in school. There's ups and downs when you're looking for internships, and obviously when you're on that career path, and you're going to learn that whole process, being able to pivot, being agile in the industry. That's really what the MBA is going to help you do, as well as learn and build that network and all those kind of. We talk a lot about hard skills and soft skills, so that was great. So.
Sure.
I'm going to kind of transition now, and we're going to allow Tovar Moreno to kind of do the same thing. Hey, what led you to Willamette, Tovar? What kind of skills were you able to use and leverage? And you've also had an interesting experience with your internships and how you kind of landed where you are. So I'm going to go ahead and let you take over.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate you, you all for having me here. I came to Willamette as an undergrad. Was recruited to play football here. And as I was getting recruited, they had mentioned this MBA 3+2 program. And at the time I, had a different vision in mind and what I wanted to do in life. So I didn't really pay much attention to it, but there was not an undergrad business degree. So I, went with communications at Willamette, and, Cass had ended up sort of working at the MBA and caught me one day, and I was walking down by the mill stream back to my dorm, and caught me and started talking to me about it. And we had a couple other players that have gone through the program, and also Paymon had just graduated and got a magnificent job with the Seahawks. And so right then and there, I was like, okay, there's something about this program that I don't know about. I ended up taking an undergrad class with Deborah, and it was just the first business class. It was her first undergrad class ever, I believe, at the school that AGSM had ever put on. And it was amazing. And I really, sat there and thought, okay, this is why you come to college and get higher education, is for classes like this where you're hands-on and you're learning, you're learning, but you're also applying the things that you're learning like right then and there. And so that was great. Realized I wanted to do the MBA. And while I was going into the MBA, I got an internship down in Los Angeles with a beverage company, and I was their first sales intern. And so I loved it. I love sales. I love talking to people. I love networking. And so my first year at the MBA, it was Compass Week, and right away that was the first thing we did. You're talking to people. You're learning about each other. You're learning about the school, and then you're just networking the whole time. And I was like, okay, this is fun. And the one thing that I really loved about the MBA was the courses that you had to take. I would have never wanted to take Excel classes and data analysis and accounting, but because I had to take those classes, I actually use it in my daily job, even though I shouldn't have to, but I still do, and it's great because I have the ability to do those things. In my current role, I'm the director of sales for a beverage company that's a startup, and my vice president of sales is not very knowledgeable in the beverage industry. But as far as company and how to run the organization and things like that, it needs a lot of help. And so leveraging my MBA in my current role has helped me do that tremendous. And I'll back up a little bit. So after, the first semester of the MBA program, you have to get an internship, especially for the early career change. And so I started applying at internships at all the big corporations, and things were going great. I had accepted an internship. I'd accepted 2 internships at one point, and then Southwest Airlines called me over winter break in December, like the day before Christmas. Did the interview, it was great. Had another interview the next day on Christmas Eve. I don't know why they were working, but had that interview. They said, "Cool, you got the job." And I said, "Okay, nice." So I ended up interning with Southwest Airlines, moved down to Dallas, Texas. And Southwest Airlines is a great company. In the program, they'll come up pretty frequently in some cases that you study, and just overall things in organizational analysis, and company culture and things like that. And that was an awesome experience, and I really loved it. Get to fly around the country for free wherever you want, and things like that. But when I was there, I was able to talk about I'm getting my MBA, and at the time I was 22 years old, and everyone's looking at me like, you're getting your MBA? I'm like, yeah, I'm in this amazing program, 3+2. Like, people were shocked. And so I ended up getting another internship, the spring of 2023, leveraging not only my MBA, but the networking ability that I've had obtained at Willamette. Learning how to talk to people, learning how to present, learning how to, present in front of a crowd. And, I was able to, get another internship, was doing corporate partnerships to multi-million dollars to big corporations. And it was great. I loved it. And at that point, I'm in the second year of my MBA, I was talking to a lot of alumni. We used to have lunch talks where alumni would come in, and there was one guy in particular that came and talked, and his name was Harmon Bruno. And just from that talk, I shot him a message. He gave me his number. We had a couple of conversations, and from there, he was like, "Look, where are you trying to work?" And at the time, I was like, "I want to work in tech sales." Okay. So then he started connecting me with other people from Willamette MBA. Like, this person works here, this person works here, this person works here. You can just start picking and choosing, right? Introducing me to them, and got a lot of great job offers and great job opportunities at some big companies. And then I was in the angel investing class at Willamette. And the angel investing class, for those who don't know, Willamette has a fund where there's 7 groups that they go to 7 groups across the country, and you're with angel investors, and you're taught how to evaluate deals, how to evaluate companies, and then from there you go down to the groups. The first group meeting I ever went to, I was a part of the New Fund Venture Group in San Diego. Every person in that room was a millionaire except for myself and my partner, John Kirk, at the time. So we walk in there, and there's a group of 343 millionaires, and then there's 2 MBA students. But being able to walk in that room knowledgeable about angel investing, how to evaluate a company, and all those things, but also network with those people, was amazing. Being able to leverage that and learn about the startup world that's pretty relevant right now in our society, and how things are going in tech and all those things, it was amazing. And so when I got into that, I realized, well, I think I want to go into the startup world, and I want to eventually start my own thing. But I said I want to get into a company early. So I went back to a company that I had interned with in 2021. They were expanding and they needed help in Northern California. And I said, okay, I'll help you out, but I'm going to need something in return. And I negotiated a pretty sweet deal. And that's something that I also learned, at Willamette, was negotiation, how to leverage your MBA and your experience into what they're trying to give you, and get something a little bit more out of it because they have the money. And so that's where my current role is with Don't Quit. I have a nice, equity share in the company, and I'm working for them, doing sales. We're in our sales team, up and down California. And it was great, because I used the angel investing class. We went out and raised $12 million my first 3 months there at the company. And we raised money from Madison Square Garden, El Catterton, Sweetwater Capital. And these are like big, venture capitalist firms. And, our CEO, who I'd never met, I come in here and we start talking about it. And he was like, "Oh my goodness, you learned all that?" "Yeah, my school actually taught me that." And he was like, "Oh man, that is pretty crazy. That's pretty insane." So, leveraging, what I learned at Willamette, at the MBA school and at Atkinson, and taking great classes, it has been really, really, really fruitful for me, especially taking Professor O'Connor's leadership class. I didn't anticipate, leading a team of 16 people that are all a lot older than me. So I really had to dig back into my old presentation on leadership. Okay, what are my leadership styles? How can I deal with this, right? I've got, I call them colleagues. I got a colleague that's, 42 years old and has 2 kids and a wife. And I'm, 23 with literally no one. So it's like, for me, I can work 24 hours a day if I want to. And they're like, "Hey, I got to go home." I was like, "Yeah, okay." How do you find that balance? And, the leadership class had helped me, learn about that, and, some other classes at Willamette as well. So it's, if you do it the right way, there are a lot of things out there for you, but it's not going to be handed to you. I think people will come into the MBA and feel some sort of entitlement, like, oh, I got my MBA, I need to get hired by this company. That's not the way it works. You have to really put yourself out there and leverage your MBA and the alumni network that Willamette provides to help you get to where you want to go.
That's great, man. That's a great story. I mean, both you and Gianna, great examples of coming right out of undergrad, getting their MBA early, leveraging those skills, leveraging the network in the university, and then landing on your feet. And so appreciate that. And now I want to segue into our next speaker, Christopher Lopez. And so for all of you watching that are in a different path, so the two different paths that we offer, obviously, that early career path, which is what we just talked about, and that's kind of been new to bring some early career alums and former students on here to talk about, hey, how does that work? And now we also have this MBA for professionals, more of an executive type MBA. And Chris Lopez is in this program right now. And Chris, I would love for you to kind of share, what brought you to the MBA program? How are you utilizing this? Has it helped you in your work that you're doing? And I'm going to let you kind of take it over.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Cass. My journey toward an MBA, I think, began at a SEDCOR luncheon a handful of years ago. I approached Nate and Cass there. They looked very dapper in their suits, and I said, I don't know who those guys are, but I'm going to go talk to them. Right? That's what you go to those events for. And at the time, I was working in the insurance space, right? And I've had I'm very much mid-career, right? Just turned 40, so I know Tovar mentioned this guy 42, what have you. I'm like, oh yeah, that guy and me, we're still young, right? And so I've speaking with some of my mentors and individuals that I look up to personally and professionally, right? I asked, I said, is this the right thing to do? Am I too late? And they said, no, in fact, that's just the right point to do this. You've got a career behind you. I've owned my own businesses before, my own small businesses, very small, right? I've worked in small family owned businesses. I've worked in large corporate publicly traded wine companies, and then most recently insurance. And one thing, though, that I knew about myself was that I wanted to expand my own capacity, right? I'd reached a point in my career where I could see myself maintaining, current roles and being very successful and very happy with it. But I knew that there was more out there. I knew I was capable of more, and I just needed some tools to get there. And so that's really what drove me, right? It wasn't to get a job. I had a job. I had a great job, right? But I wanted to do more with what I was capable of, contribute more to the world, and of course, make a comfortable living, while I'm at it. But I just saw myself maxing out, and I didn't want to max out at 40, and then just coast the next 20, 25 years until retirement. And so that's what I'm here to do. And that's what the MBA has done for me thus far. I was an insurance broker at a large international firm, Hub International, fantastic company, really takes wonderful care of their people. But I wanted to be back in management, right? And I wanted to not only be in management, but to be in management where I could truly have a deep impact in the world and the systems around me, and build a great life for myself, a great life for my newborn. I have a little one, came this past summer, and so really just wanted to have an active hand in crafting the world that we all live in. So, what did I do? I leveraged my MBA to be able to move from Hub to Mid-Willamette Valley Community Action Agency, where I'm an associate director. I make a comparable salary, believe it or not, to what I was doing in the insurance world, although I put in a heck of a lot more work in the nonprofit world. But my department, we have approximately 50 FTE, and the experiences I'm gaining right now are not only letting me actively have a hand in crafting the world around me to be a better place, but also preparing me, and that coupled with the teachings that I'm experiencing at Willamette are preparing me to be able to really launch to that next step. And I get offers, I get people sending me things on a weekly basis right now, opportunities saying, you really ought to go do this, you really ought to go do that. And right now, I want to get as much as I can out of my time at Willamette. I want to stay here.
Oh, did we lose Chris there for a second? Man, that was great stuff. He was right there at the end. Maybe he'll pop back in here. But that's awesome. I mean, Chris said it best right there. I mean, here's a perfect example of why a lot of MBA for professionals come back to school is they have a job, but that's not quite the end all be all for them. They want to get more skills. They want to go to that kind of next level. And Chris jumped back in, and he's doing great in this program. He's actually he's kind of talking down a little about himself because he's actually joined a lot of boards since he's been in the program. He's doing a lot of fantastic things, and so we're very fortunate that he was here to talk to us while he was here. I know he's in Seattle. He's at a conference, but thank you for everybody. I mean, the other part of this whole thing is that it's 7:30, and I know we value everybody's time. I got some texts already. Hey, I got to go to another meeting, and so some people had to take off. But Marley and Nate, if you saw any questions in the chats that I had missed, let me know. Otherwise, our panelists, Professor O'Connor, we really appreciate everybody that was here. I'm going to go ahead and since I don't see Chris coming back, I'm going to transition really quickly here. Nate and Marley and Salazar, if you have anything that you would like to contribute here, we're interested in anybody who's interested in our MBA for professionals or our early career change program to go ahead, scan the QR code. We can get you more information, the steps to apply. We talk about this in every webinar. Pretty easy. Our application is free. Doesn't cost you anything. We are the #1 ranked MBA program in the state of Oregon. Some people say, well, you're not ranked #1. Do I even have a shot of getting in? We take a holistic approach to every applicant, so don't sell yourself short. We believe every stone needs polishing. If you're interested in getting your MBA, you're motivated, you want to increase your skills, you want to learn how to network, you want to be a better communicator, you want to learn how to lead and manage, this is a fantastic program. We've got great people in it, great alums, great network. So keep us in mind. And then thank you, everybody, for showing up. I'm going to go ahead and sign everybody out now. And I'm going to ask our panelists and Professor O'Connor to stay on. And oh, Chris, are you back?
Yeah, I'm back. I'm so sorry about that. I'm in the the heart of the tech industry here in a hotel, and go figure, my connection drops out.
That's okay. No, you know what? You lasted. You were doing great. If you want to finish your last segment, feel free here, and then we'll close it out.
Oh yeah, sure. So I mean, I was just saying that the program has been incredibly flexible with me, and absolutely rigorous in terms of teaching expectations, and at the same time, right, they want people to succeed. You're building these tools, you're working collaboratively with your cohort, with professors, and there are real world skills that I'm building in class every single week that I'm able to directly apply to my work in real time. It's an incredible experience.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate everybody. Chris, I appreciate that. Thanks for coming back on. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording now.